In this video, we are going to put together our printer, and I would recommend you lay out the parts on the table as described in one of these videos. I'll also provide you a picture of all the parts laid out on the table. That will just make it super easy for us to put them together and know what part goes where. And we are going to start by putting together all the parts that you see on this side of this video. These parts include our right bar, left bar, our screen, power supply, Z-axis motor, Z-axis limit switch, and the lead screw. This entire sub-assembly or part of this whole assembly process is also described in the manual as step 1 through step 4, though you do not need to follow these steps marked here, as you'll be following me in this video putting together all the components. So to get started, we are going to start with the right side bar, and we are going to put it together using M545 screws. We have 4 screws, 2 screws for each sides, and we're going to mount these to the base assembly. We are going to understand what's the right side bar, what's the left side bar, what orientation this needs to go in. So the bar which has 2 holes which are spaced far away is our right side bar. These 2 holes are where we will be mounting the power supply. The orientation of this bar, whether this bar goes like this or like this, is defined by where your power supply is going to be. And we are going to put our power supply more close to the base assembly rather than far away. So the screw hole which is closest to the bottom side is the one which is going to be placed on the base assembly. Now the left side bar has 2 holes on one end and no hole on the other end. And these 2 holes are essentially meant to mount the Z-axis motor. So we are going to mount the Z-axis motor close to the base assembly. That's why the left side bar goes onto the base assembly in this orientation. So it's time to put these bars together using the M545 screws. We'll start with the right side bar assembly. To put together the right side bar, we'll hold this base assembly at an angle and start putting together the screw. So now, just watching me, you should realize here that it would be great if you can take some help from someone else here, so that it's not just a single person process, because it can get a bit challenging to put it all together yourself and you may end up dropping some of the parts. One thing to note while you put together these screws is try to run your finger on the side bar and the side of the base assembly and make sure these are flush and this is not twisted. We'll put together the screws, hand tighten them so that we know they are in. And once they are hand tightened, we're going to take the largest size Allen wrench and start putting together these screws. Another thing to note here is these screws are made out of steel and the side bar is made out of aluminum. So we do not want to tighten it so much that we start biting into the aluminum and start damaging the threads. So go tight enough where with reasonable amount of force you can't move it anymore, but we don't need to go super hard on these screws. So that's the right side bar. Similarly, we'll go and assemble the left side bar. One benefit now you have is you have the side bar, so you can rest the entire printer on the right side bar, and this makes it easy to put together the M545 screws and mount the left side bar. Make sure you keep this cable away and do not pinch it, and keep it towards the front side of the printer. Again, similar to how we made sure the sides are flat on the right side bar, we make sure the left side bar sides are flat to the side of the base assembly. Now that we have the side bars assembled, let's go to the next step and put together the power supply and the LCD screen onto the base assembly. Your power supply should have this end cable terminal right at the bottom that will be connected to the base assembly cable terminal. We'll get to this at the very end, but just make sure that you pull this cable terminal out of this bottom pocket so that once it's mounted, it's not stuck down there. In order to mount this power supply, we are going to use M420 screws, and these two screws go into these two holes right here. That's why we have these two holes spaced far away so that it can hold this big power supply. So just make sure your holes are all lined up and you can turn it by hand so that it's sitting there. And now what we'll do is we're going to use the second largest size wrench for these screws and put them together. So now that the power supply is on, let's put together the screen onto the base assembly. The screen has these two holes and we are going to use M58 screws to put this together, and this screen is going to go on the right side of the assembly. So let's hold the screen here, take our two screws, try to just hand tight them so that the screen is located, and then we'll use the wrench. In case these are tiny enough that you can't hold it by hands, we can start holding it with our wrench itself, and once you have the holes aligned, you can start tightening these screws. So now that our screen and the power supply is assembled to the base assembly, the next step is to assemble the Z-axis motor, the Z-axis limit switch, and the lead screw onto the base assembly.